Well, welcome to the Mining Law Summit. I am Mary Poulton, and our topic today is going to be minerals to meet the needs of the modern world. And I'm the panel moderator, Mary Poulton. I'm Distinguished Professor of Mining and Geological Engineering and co-director of the Lowell Institute for Mineral Resources at the University of Arizona. And I'm joined today by a couple of august panelists, Dr. David Hammond and Dr. Jaehan Lee. And I will let each of them introduce themselves. So Jaehan, let's start with you. If you could introduce yourself.
All right. Thank you, Mary, for introduction. Hi, my name is Jaehan Lee. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Mining and Geological Engineering at the University of Arizona. I'm a material science and engineer and a metallurgical engineer by training, and then focused on extractive metallurgy side. I've been in the department for about 6 years, and before that, I spent some time with the global mining company like Newmont Mining and Barrick Gold. So those two gold mining company working on different corporate project and research and development, innovations, and an operating support. Even if I work on a gold mining company, I mean, I have a experience on some base metal project too. And at the University of Arizona, I teach few classes and the gold and copper hydrometallurgy, including like different green chemicals to extract the metals, biohydrometallurgy, and many others. So these days, the nickel, cobalt, lithium, rare earth are the big part of my research. And then I just started a small project for like a lithium-ion battery recycling. So thank you.
Excellent. We look forward to your comments this morning. Dave, could you introduce yourself to our viewers?
Sure, Mary. Hello, everyone. I'm more of an industry type person, although I've last few years I've been really much involved in university level education. But I'm coming up on about 50 years experience in mining and energy industry as geologist, engineer, and mineral economist, and have worked for major and mid-tier companies such as Anaconda, Atlantic Richfield, and consultancies, including PricewaterhouseCoopers. And I was an officer with International Royalty Corporation during the life of that company. During the last couple decades, I've been involved with just about every one of the critical minerals as an economic analysis primarily, but also as market researcher and served as expert witness. I'm also involved with mineral appraisal and commodity education at the university level, and I've been with volunteer with ABET for the last 15 years and have served as commissioner on both engineering science programs.
Well, thank you. And thank you both. I think that you both bring a wealth of knowledge to this topic, and I look forward to your comments today. I'm going to kick things off by talking a little bit about some of the buckets of minerals that are of interest to us, and in particular, breaking this out into some categories of technology minerals. And so first is all of the computing and communication devices that we're using, the phones, tablets, laptops, et cetera. So those all require materials. Then we have the cloud services that connect all of these devices to the internet. That cloud service is anything but weightless. There's a lot of material use in those services. Both of those require energy infrastructure to run, and quite a bit of energy actually. And then there's energy storage associated with that. Then we have the whole growing electric vehicle market, and then finally national security. And I want to take each of these in turn and just give our audience a little bit of background about our consumption. And then we'll get a deeper dive into some specific mineral needs here. Each of these electronic devices, we estimate, uses between 60 and 66 different elements, and therefore different minerals in most electronics. We have about 50 billion of these devices connected to the internet today, and that number is growing rapidly. The cloud that supports these devices and the server farms that run the cloud are anything but weightless. A single data center has as many as 80,000 servers, and there are thousands of these data centers around the world. They all require minerals, they all require electricity. And the cloud services companies are advertising that they are running on renewable energy. That renewable energy infrastructure also demands a lot of minerals and a complex set of minerals at that. So to give you some idea of the energy consumption of these cloud services, there's a popular music video called Despacito. It hit 5 billion with a B YouTube views in April of 2018. That burned enough electricity to be the equivalent usage of 40,000 US homes for a year, just for that one music video. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency miners use the electricity equivalent every year of Kansas City, Missouri. And those renewable energy choices have high mineral footprints in and of themselves. So 100 megawatts of wind energy powers about 75,000 US homes. That requires 30,000 tons of steel and about 50,000 tons of concrete, not to mention about a ton of neodymium for the magnets. And all that energy ultimately has to be stored somewhere in batteries. So Tesla has their Giga battery factory in Nevada, and it would take that factory 500 years to make enough batteries to store US electricity demand for a single day. Now we bring electric vehicles into the market with a different mix of minerals in those cars and trucks, different batteries, and they all have to be charged, so it changes the grid infrastructure as well. And all of this has shorter lifespan than a lot of the vehicles and energy technology that we're used to. Now we throw in something like nuclear energy, which we tend to not want to talk about much, but the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission has recently approved small modular nuclear reactors. And these generate about 60 megawatts. You can put them together in a series of 12. They're much safer than the reactors that we've been building for the last 40 years or so. But solar takes up about 5 to 10 acres per megawatt. One of these small modular nuclear reactors on 30 acres could replace a square mile of solar panels. And so I think at some point, nuclear energy has to be a more serious part of the conversation. And finally, what drives a sense of urgency for the US government is national security. We have things like rare earth elements that are absolutely essential in many of our defense technologies today. And they're also an essential part of our electronics that we've just talked about. And as we know from our COVID experiences this year, that extended supply chains can be optimized for low cost or perhaps exporting environmental impact to other countries, but they're not resilient in the face of disruption. So what our panel is going to talk about is the fact that when we talk about substitution and these new technologies, we're just shifting around the periodic table. There's nothing outside the periodic table of elements that we're using. And so substitution just shifts us around. It doesn't necessarily solve problems. And in many respects, it actually creates more complex problems as we look at rare kinds of minerals in the Earth's crust. And there's a different set of markets that are very important and a very different set of technology needs for processing. And that's what we're going to get into with the panel today. So maybe Dave, if you could help us understand what are critical minerals, what are our supply options, and what are some of the pros and cons of that supply?
Sure, Mary. Well, why the USGS has alerted the industry and government to the US's dependence on foreign sources for many of our country's vital mineral needs, at least over the last couple of decades, via its annual reports on import reliance, focus on actually doing something about our dependency has been pretty low key until only very recently. A DOE-funded Critical Minerals Institute was established about 10 years ago and was instrumental in identifying the minerals of most importance and criticality of U.S. technology needs, and for which domestic production is essentially non-existent. Together with a USGS, a list of 35 non-fuel minerals and mineral groups was defined, as shown on this slide. Note that uranium was deleted from this list when folks apparently discovered that, belatedly discovered that it was actually an energy fuel mineral and didn't fit with the definition originally established as a critical mineral. At the present time, these minerals are essentially sourced from offshore in not insignificant amounts from countries which are really not our friends, like Russia and China, or from unstable politically countries or unfavorable economically, such as the Congo and unfortunately, increasingly South Africa. It's also important to recognize that the issue is not only access to primary mineral supply, it's also the processing of raw materials to their usable forms, such as metal or metal alloys. The capability to do so in too many cases is no longer available in the US, or it never was a capacity that had been established here. And again, we must depend on sometimes questionable benevolence of others to provide to the U.S. what we need. In the cases such as rare earths, even if the ores containing the critical materials can be extracted here in our country, they must go to someplace like China for processing and fabrication into usable products such as magnets. The fact of life in today's world is that China essentially controls 100% of the processing for rare earths to get into these forms that go into the products. And increasingly, it controls the great bulk of the actual fabrication of critical items like the rare earth, high efficiency rare earth magnets. An example of this, of course, is the Mountain Pass mine in California, the U.S.'s only current rare earth producer. It seems that government officials and politicians have only recently understood that this is a big problem, even though people in industry have been trying to tell them or make them aware of this for many years now. The other aspect that needs to be kept in mind is that for many of these critical materials, the actual tonnage demanded for them annually, and this is both domestically or at the global scale, they're currently relatively small. Perhaps in some cases, the rare earths, only a few hundreds or thousands of tons each year, compared to millions of tons of primary production in the case of copper or iron ore. Markets are also uncertain, and prices in many cases for these critical materials is non-transparent. The implication, of course, is that the big and even mid-tier mining companies will never get involved in producing many of these critical materials other than as a fortuitous byproduct from the base metal or other materials that are the primary product at their operations. So the deep pocket capital needed for developing mining and processing of these critical materials is not available from the private sector in most cases. The small volumes and uncertain pricing really makes many of the critical materials unattractive investment candidates. Add to that is the fact that some of the critical materials involve tough metallurgy and the associated cost of getting them into a usable form. The small and specialized markets mean that dominant suppliers and processors, again, China as an example, can manipulate the selling prices to accomplish political objectives. Obviously, with continuing advances in technology and new application demand for many of these critical materials, that will continue to grow in the coming decades. But it's unrealistic to expect that the needs in tonnages or the volumes will never achieve the numbers that we see in base and other industrial mineral sectors. Supply will grow as well, as there are many geological environments which contain these minerals. We always say in the case of rare earths, well, they're not really rare. They're just kind of unusual, and the economic concentrations of them are sometimes hard to find. There are many geological environments which contain these minerals, but they just haven't yet been evaluated for their technical or commercial potential. Examples in progress or just beginning to be researched are rare earth elements in coal and coal combustion products, ocean manganese nodules, trace elements associated with iron ores, geothermal waters and brines, particularly there for lithium, onshore paleonodule beds, which are just starting to be looked at, and laterites. And this, of course, in addition to exploration for conventional geologic mineral occurrences. But incentive for the project sector to conduct this work is today highly speculative and problematic. And of course, lastly, we must add the environmental considerations involved with mining processing for most of these elements. These are often substantial and generate enormous quantities of waste to obtain relatively small amounts of useful material. The absence of participation by deep pockets, socially concerned and technically knowledgeable major mining companies who can address these environmental problems heightens concern about the potential impacts in society in both developed and the third world countries. Does that answer the question or help answer the question, Mary?
It certainly poses for us that we've got not only hard science and technology problems to solve, but there's a very big geopolitical market problem here as well.
You covered the good thing that all those, our mining and metallurgical, the scientists and engineers urged the government to do something and a long time ago, but not much had happened so far. So let me ask you a question. And I know there's the President Trump executive order. So what does the executive order do? The other attempts that we have so far at reducing our importance, import reliance, that has not done before. So can you comment on that, Dave?
Sure, Jehan. And this is a very interesting recent development. So starting some 10 years ago, the U.S. government has funded small university research programs on certain critical minerals, primarily through the Department of Energy. The focus has been almost exclusively on rare earths and the technical possibilities of extracting them from coals and fly ash. I think that this preference or focus on the coal sector has really been, has had the objective of how can we preserve our coal industry in the United States as we're decarbonizing the electric generating sector. So the funding grants have been fairly small. In my mind, the work has progressed without much sense of urgency or adequate considering of a realistic commercial scale production possibilities from coal resources. But these grants have indeed helped to reestablish and even expand our domestic research capabilities for rare earths, and has started to build a cohort of research scientists in this area. This is very, very important. During the past 2 years, the Department of Defense has become involved in funding grants to existing and potential rare earth producers and processors. Now, this funding grants, they've been done under provisions of the 1950 Defense Production Act, and obviously as a reaction to the heightened concerns by the Trump administration about rare earth shortages for national security applications. Funding grants for process development have been issued to 2, possibly 3 firms, including Mountain MP Materials, which operates the Mountain Pass mine on the California-Nevada border. That is the only producing rare earth operation that we have in the U.S. at the present time. However, the grant application and issuance process is a long, laborious process. It has starts and stops, and there's been a lot of bureaucratic decision making, and unfortunately, a lot of fairly unnecessary political interference. Funding amounts are still not clear to the general public. And again, the process really seems to have lacked any sense of urgency, and has been drawn out for many months over the past year and a half. However, there was a very significant event. It took place on September 30th, when President Trump issued an executive order declaring a national emergency regarding the sourcing and processing of critical minerals, and directing that the Secretaries of Energy, Defense, Interior, Treasury, and Commerce, as well as heads of other relevant federal agencies, take immediate action to prioritize the expansion and protection of the domestic supply chain for minerals and the establishment of secure critical mineral supply chains, close quote. Now, my mind, compared to all previous governmental policy issuances to foster supply of critical materials, this one may well have some teeth in it and generate some meaningful action. For one thing, there are deadlines imposed for when these agency heads must report back to the president on their findings regarding the provision of critical materials, and identify the specific policy actions they will take to address the emergency. At this time, things are not going to be stretched out. The order gives specific times for the deliverables to the president in this regard. And these are not leisurely. They're 30-day and 60-day deadlines defined for various tasks, with progress reporting required on implementation at 180-day intervals in the following years. As opposed to the Bush and Obama administrations, the Trump administration appears to have taken these countries' critical mineral vulnerability as a serious issue, and it elevated the demand for action really to a new level. How the agencies will respond, of course, remains an open question, as is the degree to which a possible Biden administration would continue to focus on the issue. So important development, but and encouraging from the standpoint of observers of our critical mineral, particularly rare earth situation, but still remains to be seen how things go.
Oh, that's an excellent summary, Dave. You know, what strikes me is there's a sense of urgency now, but yet we have let many of our critical intellectual skills in these areas atrophy over the last 40 years. And particularly, as Jehan knows, metallurgical engineers, particularly research-oriented metallurgical engineers, are pretty scarce in US universities these days. And so Jehan, because the metallurgy, the processing is such a critical piece of being able to produce these more exotic technology minerals today. Could you talk to us a little bit more about why the processing is difficult and just kind of educate us a bit on this?
Okay, sure. Yeah. I mean, before that, I didn't know that the executive order was the starting point of those the rare earth project from the coal and the coal byproducts. So I think I learned a new thing today. So rare earth. So most of the production of the rare earth elements is from the mineral we call the monazite and bastnasite. So the processing those ores need a different process. So we call the mineral processing. Usually we do froth rotations and gravity separation, sometimes magnetic separations. And then we also need to extract, leach the material using sulfuric acid and hydrochloric acid. And then the intermediate compound can be recovered, but must be further processed to get the recover of each elemental, rare earth elements. So those processes include the we call the fractional crystallizations and metal precipitations, and solvent extractions, ion exchange, and the metal reduction. It's a very different, distinct unit process. So in just a little bit more detail, then ore first processed by the mineral beneficiation using different separation technology, and then the other metals, the other method to reject the lower grade material or the waste material. So we can increase the metal content in the product. So the upgraded materials that we call the concentrate are about anywhere between 40% to 60% rare earth oxide. And then it is further processed in the water-based aqueous solution system to dissolve the rare earth elements in the solution. And then leach solution treated to remove impurity and a process to generate the purified, the bulk rare earth product. And this product is often a solid oxide. Sometimes, usually there are lots of carbonate or chloride compound containing very low impurities, and then ready for the next process. And then the following refining process are even more complicated and involving many different unit process to produce the the rare metals or rare oxide. So it sometimes need complex chemistry, and it required a very high amount of energy and the water resources, and then somewhat it's labor intensive. So it's a very difficult, and then that's why at Mountain Pass it's a struggle. So the other big problem in terms of the environmental issues that I want to mention, that the rares are found with the radioactive elements such as thorium and uranium. It's commonly, and that caused the problem on a tailing storage facility. We don't want to store huge amount of the tail containing radioactive materials. So these are radionuclides that generally occur in the deposit. Not only have the issues causing those issues, but also it triggered a strong opposition to the future, the rarest project development. So one example in Malaysia, the Linus project, the commissioning is delayed on over a year due to the concern of the fate of the thorium in the concentrating process. So nobody wants to have. So that eventually the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agents, they were involved to review all those projects, and so that's why the project is delayed more than a year. And other potential environmental issues are, these days, the greenhouse gas and also water consumption. So one example, so greenhouse gas productions, it could be up to like a 56 kilogram of a carbon dioxide equivalent per 1 kilogram of what we call the SAG oxide, SEG oxide, like a samarium, europium, and a gadolinium. Those oxides, we need, generate about almost 60 kilograms the carbon dioxide. Compared to the copper, for the production of copper, we only generate like around 5 kilograms of the CO2 for 1 kilogram of copper. The nickel involved a little bit more. It's about around 10 to 15 kilogram of the carbon dioxide to generate for the nickel productions. And then the water. These days, water is probably the most important thing. And then the consumption for the same SAG oxide, it's huge. It's like a 1,750 liters per kilogram of that SAG oxide. Again, compared to the number for the copper and the nickel, it's only about 40 liters per kilogram of copper generation. You can imagine like a copper heap leaching. The leach pad is mile long and a mile depth, and we only use about 40 liters of water. And a nickel, again, a little bit more, it's about 370. But that rare earth element is used more than 1,700. That's a huge amount of water that we have to use. And then energy. So we talk about the greenhouse gas and water, and then eventually the energy. So the energy requirement for rare earth element recovery is huge again. The copper, per kilogram copper, we need about 200 megajoules of energy per 1 kilogram of copper. Then for the scandium oxide, it's 11 gigajoule. It's a several order of magnitude higher than the copper. So we use a lot of energy. People said for the electrowinning, the rectifying the electricity, we consume huge amount of energy for the copper, but compared to the rare earth element, it's nothing. So that's why it's a very expensive and energy intensive, and it's difficult to recover those rare earth elements.
Wow. I have to say, I had a sense of the complexity, but I had no idea of the amount of energy and water, Jehan, that was involved in this. And, for our audience to understand this a little bit, we're dealing with very complex minerals in terms of chemical formulas and crystal structure. And in many of the technology, metals and minerals we're talking about, the element that we need to extract is actually a contaminant within the crystal structure of these minerals. And so it's a lot more complex geology, mineralogy, and metallurgy to deal with that. And because of that, we do have very complex processing streams. Wow, that's eye-opening, I think, for me and for our audience.
Jehan, so the Mountain Pass mine, which started, I don't know, some 20, 30 years ago, as the only US producer of rare earths, and unfortunately had gone through a number of ownership changes and some shutdowns due to the environmental issues that probably related back to what you just, some things you just covered. But today, it's back producing a rare earth concentrate, but it goes to China. It's exported to China for all of the final process and the extraction of the actual rare earths. Why is this? How did this come about?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. So, I mean, one of our graduate students actually now work at the Mountain Pass mine, and then I talked to one ex-employee several months ago, and I was told that their rare earth concentrate, and as I mentioned, that's about a 40%, 60% degrade. They produce their rare earth concentrate using different the separation process, flotation, and other methods that need a further processing. And it requires, as I said, a lot of energy. It generates way too much greenhouse gas, and their operating costs, including labor, that's really high. So the processing itself is not simple. So, I mean, one example is we can extract, for the copper case, for the solvent extraction, we can use a specific organic extractant to extract over 90% copper in just a two-step. So one example is 80% efficiency. We extract once, we can extract 80%. In a second stage, if we can extract 80% of those 20% remaining, we get 96% efficiency. But most of the extractant that we use in a rare earth, that efficiency is not even 50%. So some of them is like a 20, 30%. So you need sometimes 10, sometimes 20, even 100 steps to efficiently concentrate those rare earth elements in an aqueous phase or even in an organic phase. So you have to use that huge amount of the chemicals, and it's a mixed cellular. You have to use the power, and it generates a lot of the off gas, and it causes environmental issues. So, I mean, it's you can Google the rare earth solvent extraction mixed cellular. You can see the series and a parallel connected rare earth mixed cellular pictures that you can easily find in the Google.
Wow.
So in the U.S., with the current situation and the condition, it's I would say it's practically not possible to process in an economic way. So you process it, you sell it, you got to make some money out of it. So all those the concentrate are shipped to China. So they use the less restricted environmental regulations with a cheap labor. So it is possible for them to process those rare earth oxide that produce in the United States. And they already have a plant in the many and the locations in China that's available. So getting more material is not a burden. I mean, but in the U.S., we got to have all those. We got to build a new plant, and that's cause another like a capital cost and of course operating cost. So that's why there's no choice that we got to send the concentrate to China.
Huh.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, what we have is you have to have the geologic resource for all of these elements. Each one of those geologic resources has a different set of needs for the extraction. The metallurgy will be different depending on what that geologic resource is. And we won't necessarily know the environmental footprint until you know the technology for the separation or the geologic resource as well. And then you have the piece you raised, Jehan, which is you have to make money doing this. I mean, at some point, there has to be a market that you can use to calculate what your costs are going to be, your throughput, your size, et cetera. And so Dave, you had mentioned there's a very wide variety of geologic resource. We've talked about primary rare earth production from a place like Mountain Pass, but you can also have byproduct and co-product production. You can extract from what we would consider a waste stream from other mining. But at the end of the day, there has to be a functioning market. And I think
Yes.
that for many of these elements, it's the market piece that we have struggled with for decades, really. So could you talk to us a little bit about markets, Dave?
Yes, and it ties right back to what Jehan has mentioned a couple times about needing in a free market system to have a profit incentive in order to undertake investments, which in this, for many of the critical minerals, materials is very risky. And the market realities are unfortunately a major factor and will continue to be so in establishing supply chains for a number of these critical materials, and in particular, the rare earth products we need. Market incentives for establishing sufficient supply for a number of critical materials, they just at the present time don't exist, and I think will be very difficult to establish anytime in the future. Ultimate primary supply sources are still evolving, but today it's very unclear which and how many of all these possibilities we've mentioned will in the end be our key support sources of supply, and will be the processing technologies that are most are optimal to generate the end products. Which of the many proposed extraction technologies currently being tested will be successful at commercial scale remains to be seen. And the product prices that a producer can receive for their output is in many cases totally controlled today by monopoly producers such as China in the case of rare earths. And really getting one's hands around the scale, the size of future demand is really a difficult task. A number of these critical mineral types offer everything an investor really wants to have, right? Uncertain supply, uncertain demand, uncertain technology, and uncertain but competitor controlled pricing. You know, this is the ideal thing that you a mineral company or a metallurgy company wants to get involved with. And you throw in serious concerns about materials needed for national defense and the government involvement to get past the obstacles. Well, it seems like that's probably going to be the only solution, again, for a number of the most important critical materials that we need.
And I think it's important for the audience to understand that the mining that we're used to seeing for the last 150 years or so was built upon fairly simple mineralogy, large demand, and transparent, openly traded markets. And now we are moving into a completely different universe of mining, metallurgy, and mineral economics, in my opinion, for things that it's not nice to have these things. They are now essential to our lives, to our healthcare, to our defense, to our manufacturing, to our communications, just having this Zoom call today. And so what we're saying is the markets don't really exist in a functioning way. We have incredibly complex metallurgical issues and a lot of expense associated with that and a lot of uncertainty. And what we're hearing is that the market maker needs to be the government or some form of public-private partnership. So Dave, is there any analogy that we can draw on for this?
Yeah, Mary, when you have situations which the economists define as free market failures, and certainly in the case of rare earths, we would characterize that as such. The prescription is often having the government involvement, at least to some extent. And this isn't as rare in a capitalistic system such as ours as one might initially think. Much of our nation's infrastructure, such as the electrical grid, has government components of finance and regulation. And when it comes to a national security, a classic example in the past is the origin of the domestic uranium industry through the AEC purchase programs that existed from the late 1940s up to around 1970. This was a concentrate buying system that provided the market for new uranium mines and mills, and was highly successful because the investors, investing mining companies, had a price that they could rely on that was set by the government and not a artifact of a free market system, which didn't exist for uranium. Uranium enrichment facilities were built and owned by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but leased and operated by public and private companies. And this may well make sense considering the diffusion of efforts for supply of some of the critical materials, such as rare earths, for the government to get involved with funding support or even outright ownership of the needed processing and fabrication facilities, at least for the most critical metal products needed for defense, again, things like high efficiency magnets. The government might develop such facilities and fund the research activities behind them, but then contract again to the private sector for operation. Quite frankly, for some of the minor but totally indispensable mineral products, I can see a long and deep involvement by government agencies because there's really no other option that for establishing a market incentive for investors to get involved. Now, there is one and somewhat radical alternative that's been proposed, and that's the concept of a rare earths metals cooperative. And this has been seriously promoted by a few rare earth experts or people who have been advisors to industry and government. And what this would entail is a group of end-use consumers, such as a high-tech product manufacturers, maybe automobile companies, aircraft makers, and not unlikely even the Department of Defense, to form an entity which could build and operate the needed processing facilities or encourage the development of such by others through price and offtake guarantees. Sort of related to back what happened with under the old AEC purchase program. Such a construct would require major antitrust exemptions or waivers in view of the current restrictions on the private sector firms getting together in such a cooperative. But this is an active idea, and it turns out legislation to do exactly this, formation of a cooperative, has been developed by offices of Senator Marco Rubio, and it looks like that's going to be introduced into Congress in the very near future.
Wow. So we have historical precedent for doing new things, basically. And, what we're seeing here is that we're dealing with new kinds of geologic resources, new kinds of mineralogy, new kinds of metallurgy, and the need for new kinds of market solutions. And so all of this is, again, not the mining that we did for the last 150 years. So Jehan, it seems to me that we are going to really need some additional breakthroughs here in technology, but research support and growing that cadre of academic researchers working in this area. So what do you think are some of the breakthroughs and some of the needs that we have for these challenges going forward?
I mean, rare earth ores is very complex and difficult to treat, and sometimes developing a flow sheets take a long time. And first, the overall geology of the deposit and the mineralogical information that we have to have, solid background. And luckily these days, there are very advanced technologies such as QuantScan, MLA, and SIMS, and all those microanalysis technologies available. So we can have those information. And then the series of metallurgical tests has to come based on those information that we obtain from microanalysis. And it included comminutions and beneficiations and hydrometallurgy, and if possible, pyrometallurgy. And these days, lots of lithium projects comes in a clay material. So, comminution is less important, but that doesn't mean we can just go by the comminution. It has to be a whole package, not just focus on one area of the whole the project. And then one of the key things that I think it's develop a better separation technology. As I said, it's a copper solvent extraction advanced so much. So the hydrometallurgical electro 1 copper production skyrocketed since the development of a solvent extraction in 1980s in the US and in Chile. So it started with the General Mills, that the cereal makers, right? The League 64, that's one of the most used organic extractant. So they're following them, and the Cognis becomes BASF, and the Cytec becomes Solvay, and they invested a huge amount of time and effort to develop those organic extractants. So, we talk about the cobalt and the nickel, and the nickel cobalt is number 27 and number 28. It's so close, so that's why it's difficult to separate the nickel and the cobalt. If I put the flow sheets of a nickel and a cobalt, then everybody's going crazy. It's just so complicated. We do the similar thing and repeatedly to recover high grade the cobalt. And it's rare. It's from what, like a number 58 to 71 and a 90 to 103. It's closely packed, so no wonder it's difficult to separate. So those global chemical company got to do something. But as we mentioned, that it's a market. So $20 million, 20 million tons of copper with about $3 per pound. That's $130 billion business. And I picked expensive one, neodymium. So it's the source for the strong magnets that everybody had in the phone when it's shake. It's the overall the production is about 7,000 tons, only 7,000 tons, but the price is $50,000. And it's about $350 million business. It's a market. It's a lot of money. No doubt $350 million is a lot, but it's only 0.26% of the total copper market. So the Solvay these days and the BASF, they are not interested in making a new extractant, because the pie is too small to be shared. So that's the reason that the chemical companies, they more focus on the copper, nickel, and the cobalt. So frankly, it's a lot cheaper to buy those elements from China than developing the technology in the US. It's a sad but a true story. So it doesn't mean the Chinese have a better technology. I mean, it's the same thing, and they use the same extractant. I mean, they make even like a knockoff extractant to use that in a cheap, price. So and then also they again I mentioned that they have a cheap labor to process and less environmental regulation. So it's difficult. It's an uphill battle. So one thing that we might do is recycling, because of those neodymium strong magnet in your cell phone, it's very high purity. So if we recycle those end of life electronics product and a cell phone and computers and all those things, and that's a good resources, because it contains like 100 times more the metals that compared to the raw the ores. So recycling, I mean, it sounds easy, but it's difficult. I've been involved with like Japan, Taiwan, Thailand, Korea, those relatively small country that recycling is easier, but in the US, it's difficult. And I think the government or state, at least not the federal side, but if the state government, like California, Texas, New York, or some of the East Coast states, if state government initiate some recycling programs so they can collect all those the potential resources, I think that's the way that we can develop our own technology to extract the metal and put those back into the cycle. So.
You raise a good point there with recycling, and the European Union has had a big push on this for the last decade or so, urban mining, if you will. And Dave, it's almost like a reverse process, because we've taken something that was disseminated in the earth, we've concentrated it, we've actually made it a more complex material, again through alloying, and then we've distributed it across the planet. And now to recycle it and get the economics to work, you have to concentrate it again. And that's an issue. The pricing of recyclable materials is an issue. I mean, I think we all know what we put in our recycle bin every week, at least where I live. Half of it ends up in the landfill anyway, because there isn't a market for the recycling. And then we've built complex materials. So it's a bit like saying, I want to take the eggs back out of the cake after I've baked it. And so Dave, do you have any thoughts about some of these economic challenges that we see on the recycling side of things?
Well, I think it's going to be a tough goal, given that a lot of the applications for things such as the rare earths are small amounts in a large number of products, and this has an inherent collection problem, and the metals that you might want to separate and recycle are going to be in combination with a bunch of other stuff that basically you want to get rid of. Some of the larger chunks of, say, a rare earth, for instance, the iron, boron, neodymium magnets that are vital or indispensable for wind turbines. Well, there's some big chunks of it. And as wind turbines reach the end of their usable life, they will make, I think, pretty reasonable recycled material sources for that particular metal. But so many of the others, as you said, are so intimately involved in such small amounts with the products that you could recycle from. And I think it's going to be an important component, but I think it's going to be difficult.
Yeah, and I think it's an area where we absolutely have to have a lot of research focus, because I hate the notion of digging a hole to get these elements out of the ground and then digging another hole to bury the
Yeah.
product because we can't figure out what to do with it. And I think for the metallurgists, you're going to have both of these challenges to deal with. That, you know, how do we purify it from a natural source, and then how do we re-extract it and re-purify it from that man-made source? So this is something I think absolutely there has to be a major international research effort on dealing with recycling. In the time that we have left, I'd like to give each of you a chance to just talk about, you know, if you were king for a day, what would you focus on to deal with some of these problems? So Jehan, what are your top recommendations for things that we ought to be focusing on?
Yeah, I'll try to be short. It's already about an hour. So I want to mention that like the roles of three parties: the university and industry and the government. So first, the university in the United States, the mining department and mining and extractive metallurgy are disappearing. They're following the trend of what we call NT-BT IT, nanotechnology, biotechnology, and information technology. So all those, like the material science and engineering department, metallurgical engineering department, they just follow those trends where there's a lot more the federal grant and support. So it's, I mean, there are how many universities? Like just about a dozen universities have a mining program, and then only a handful, less than a handful universities still they kept the metallurgical engineering in the department's name. So I don't think it's easy, but I think university, at least in the US, and some universities especially, need to pay more attention in this field to revamp the program. So more faculty need to be hired, and then students get trained so we can have a better program in the university. And then industry should support the university because, I mean, university produce the future workforce for the company. So if the university is getting stronger, that the future workforce for the company is also getting stronger. So I mean, both parties had the benefits. And then this collaborative work, I have to mention about the SME. So SME, they did a tremendous job to revamp the mining and extractive metallurgy program using the career development grant and a PhD support program. So there are, I mean, now we can see the positive result of the SME's effort. And then the company, I mean, of course, there are a few other mining companies support the program. So, I mean, I would say it's been successful. And then now I think it's the right time again for the government to step in to support the mining and metallurgy program. And since the U.S. Bureau of Mines closed their doors, there's not much, I mean, essentially nothing in an NSF side. There's like no government federal research program for supporting in this field. And then there are a few, like they mentioned that the DOE program and the DOD program, a small amount of the funding is available for this the mining and extractive metallurgy. So more federal support is needed, and then university, industry, and the federal government to work together to advance our technology for the sustainable development of those critical minerals. That's my thought.
Yep, I agree. Dave, what are your thoughts?
Well, I second everything that Jehan has said there. I'm totally agreement with that. And I think something the politicians and DOD, DOE decision makers need to really think hard about is what to me is a seeming lack of practical knowledge and understanding when it comes to most of the critical minerals. Why the USGS certainly provides the technical expertise needed for the identification and characterization of the geologic resources of critical materials. My experiences over the last couple of years in particular has been that Congress people, their staffs, the agency employees, et cetera, really don't have much understanding of the real world of commercial mineral production. They really don't understand how mining works, and particularly since the demise of the Bureau of Mines in the 1990s, as Jan pointed out, they don't have anybody inside the government with the expertise, the real expertise to advise them on practical mining and processing aspects of this sector. They hence have become too reliant on outside individuals who usually have their own economic interests to promote. This leads to bad support decisions and, of course, the waste of taxpayer dollars. The identification of which mineral resource types and occurrences which would really merit government involvement to ensure a viable supply chain. Well, this is a complex and challenging issue, and unfortunately can be subject to political influence in the jurisdictions in which a potential project could be cited. So my mind, I've thought about this a bit, but it seems like what may be needed is an advisory commission of some type, but comprised of truly independent professionals with no personal financial drums to beat for a particular critical mineral, but people who have had a long, in-depth understanding of all the components and supply chains providing these minerals that we need, but which we really fear the free market will not ever be able to provide. Many of the mine and process technology projects that are being thrown at government decision makers right now are just frankly not going to pan out. Realistically, they will never amount to supply options which will be able to provide a meaningful amount of the materials required. So I guess my final comment is it seems like the officials in the government doing selections of projects to support really need some honest help.
Wow. Well, I think that we have given our audience a lot of complex things to think about, because it's not just thinking in terms of the bulk mining that we have done for so long with copper, gold, and other elements, but this is a completely new set of challenges. We know there are environmental impacts to everything we do, and really where is the trade-off going to be between the social benefit and the costs that are incurred for producing these things that we all find essential today. But I think as important as all of that is to understand that over the last 40 or 50 years, we have completely let our intellectual capital disappear to solve these problems. And that is not going to be rebuilt overnight. But thankfully, we have experts like you, Jehan and Dave, still contributing and helping grow these future generations. So I thank you both for contributing to this panel, and look forward to how the audience has questions later on that they can contribute. But I thank you both very much for your contributions to this discussion.